Since 1998, 705 children have died in the United States after being left alone in a hot car. Alrighty, straight to the point on the voiceover with this one. Not beating around the bush with what the case is all about, starting off the video. Anyway, hi guys, welcome to the very first creator commentary for Mad Orchard Crime and Society. Now this is an experiment, obviously, brand new to this, so bear with me here guys. I don't know if the first one is going to be that great. I am, as I say, a little bit feeling weird about kind of talking over myself talking, but hopefully something good comes out of this, so thank you for indulging me. So yeah, choosing Justin Ross Harris as the first case, and why don't we just listen in for a bit. Educational and socio-economic backgrounds have unwittingly let their child perish after leaving them in a hot car. The cause of this ostensibly inconceivable oversight usually comes down to a memory failure brought on by stress, distraction, a break from routine, or a combination thereof. In light of this, it is the sympathetic instinct that is most... So, that's 100% true, just to state the obvious and agree with myself a little bit there. But the thing you often see from people who kind of protest that this was an unfair kind of railroading or what have you, often they kind of take the posture that people are acting as if kind of hot car deaths or forgotten baby syndrome is what it's referred to, doesn't exist. I guess, look, there are probably a few people like that out there. I'm sure there are some who would say, no, there's no way you can do it. But I think most people accept that this horrible thing does happen by accident sometimes. It's just more of a question of whether it actually happened in this case, which we'll, obviously get into more and more as we go through. But if you do want... I guess technically this video takes a neutral stance. My personal opinion, which I will just tell you, is I lean toward guilt. And again, we'll get more into that as we go through this. But there's a documentary called Fatal Distraction, and it's named after an article about the same phenomenon. Takes the same kind of play on words title there. But it's a good documentary. I'd recommend checking it out. I managed to watch it on one of those, it's called Tubi or something, but one of those sites where it's free with ads or whatever. So if you just look it up, you can probably, whatever jurisdiction or whatever you're in, you can probably find a way to watch it if I can here in New Zealand. But anyway, in spite of being a good movie that makes perfectly valid points in the case, and I'll absolutely concede that this is a tough one, they adopt that stance of kind of, people just can't believe that this is the sort of thing that can happen. I think they kind of brush over some of the stuff that genuinely looks weird in this case. Anyway, let's listen back again a little bit.
You have security. I need you to move everybody out, okay? Everybody back. Who's driving? Where is it at? Who's driving? Hold on. We need to get this. I know. Listen, I told you shut the fucking hold of them. I'm putting up.
Harris is detained by responding officer Jacqueline Piper and put in the back of her patrol car. Even just the way he speaks to the responding officer there, shut the fuck up, my son just died. It just look, it's not the kind of thing that you can quantify, and I'll 100% concede that too. This is not scientific, this point, but it just strikes you as kind of tonally out of sync with the situation, in my opinion. I don't know. However, this footage of him in the back of the car, because we're about to talk about, how a lot of his behavior seems out of sync with the situation. I gotta say, him in the back of the car, the wailing there that we just saw, that strikes me as very much in line with this sort of, the sort of demeanor I would kind of imagine someone would have after a thing like this. So it's not 100%. I'll, again, I'm using the word concede too much, but I'll give you, there's stuff I'll grant the other side on this one, sure, but Obviously, we're about to get weird as we get to the interrogation room, because it was played in full at Harris's trial, which itself was filmed and broadcast in its entirety. If degraded footage is something that usually tempts you to quit, take note of a few things. The content of the interrogation is still mostly discernible, especially with headphones. Key dialogue will be subtitled, and above all else... Now this is going back to the days where I was a little bit lazier and didn't subtitle entire interrogations. That'll go on for a while, actually. I don't think I started doing that until all the way over at Denise Williams, I think is the first one where it's 100% subbed. Honestly, I don't think most people really need the entire thing subbed. You can hear this just fine, in my opinion, but it is good to go that extra mile. I think back in the day, I think, I thought it would take days and days to transcribe an interrogation. That's not true. It actually more takes a matter of, 10 fucking hours or whatever, but, I found a way to do it without stressing myself out too much. It can almost kind of meditative, actually, transcribing a thing, but let's not get too off track there. So, one complaint I get about this video sometimes is that we didn't need to spend as long with Justin in this part of the video, just kind of watching him. Well, we'll see in a moment, pacing around and kind of breathing heavy and wailing and then stopping wailing. I get that. I'm of the opinion, leaning toward that I made the right call. That you can't clip it up and it is abridged, but that you can't clip it up too much to kind of get the point of just how weird the whole thing looks. You need to, watch a good several minutes of it to fully get why people just did not think this looked right. I remember actually not too long after I made this, I just actually had occasion to be talking to someone who's in law enforcement and investigations, not as part of my work or anything, my work being a YouTuber making videos about crime, but just, happened to be in a conversation with someone in that line of work. And I remember them they were bemoaning, because I started talking about this case and, saying, some people think the kind of subjective behavior is overanalyzed and everything in this one. She's like, I can't stand that kind of investigative bias and people reading too much. Yeah, no, it's terrible. And then I said to them, yeah, no, but I mean, would you say there is kind of a limit? And she just, without skipping a beat, she goes, oh yeah, no, there's a limit. So there you go. Even like a big, skeptic of reading too much into something like a person's tears concedes, there's that word again, there is a point where you are allowed to go, I don't know, it just doesn't. I mean, it's not so much this right now, it's more, wait for a second, we'll get it. Come on, there. I mean, devil's advocate, that could have just been unfortunate timing, or position of his eyes at that moment. Yeah, it's this, the kind of, it's fleeting, but you can see it, that kind of moment where it just, I don't know how long I have to keep this up. I don't know if it's what's, actually going through his head, but it just looks like an unnatural pause, a pause that doesn't seem to fit with the rhythm of just overwhelming, mind-bending grief. And obviously, look, there is a perfectly, a chance that this guy is completely innocent of any wrongdoing, and what I'm doing right now is horrible. Judging it and trying to quantify why it doesn't look right or whatever, but there's no getting past your general feeling. It's a physical reflex. A person who is sobbing in response to an unbearable loss will typically appear to have little to no control over what their body is doing. The intermittent... Now, this is obviously a pretty early video. This would be the third crime video I put out. And because it's really early, this is back in the day where there's pretty much no one else really doing the JCS style of video. And I'll get more into the sort of background of how the channel came about, when we do Dennis Leary and Anthony Palmer later. But I had a thing of, I was still coming from a place of, how would JCS put it? And trying to maybe over quantify and add a sort of clinical bent to what I'm observing. Whereas these days I would go, if there's not really a clinical or psychological angle, just, use normal plain language and discuss it from that perspective. And I think the channel is better for it as well, because I'm a different person with different, inclinations. But some of the, what I'm getting at is some of the interjections here are a little bit probably what I would call borderlining on pretentious these days. And that too, right? And again, I get you can't totally quantify this sort of thing. But when he stops to have the water, like aside from just stopping crying to have some water, there's no, it doesn't look like he's, struggling to gulp it down because he just wants to keep wailing, whatever. It's kind of like, okay, we had the crying session, now let's stop that and go to the water drinking session now. It's very segmented. And it just, for the umpteenth time, I get this is not scientific, but it just, there's no denying it looks weird. Let's make a resolution to not make that point anymore during this commentary. I'm sorry to be so redundant. Maybe there is too much of this. Maybe those people criticizing me are right. I think I've matured as an editor. I've got a better eye for what needs to be seen and what doesn't need to be seen. I still would have left that. If I just fiddle around with a chalkboard for a moment, or a whiteboard for a moment. I mean, he looks bored. But people can look one way and it's not necessarily coming from this place or whatever. I get it. Now, Justin Ross Harris's convictions, by the way, or murder convictions, not all of his convictions, but the most serious ones, have actually been quashed by the Georgia Supreme Court. But he's not. He hasn't been acquitted. He's getting a retrial, and we will talk a bit more about why that is when the issue at hand comes up. But just FYI, if you weren't aware. And if they do a retrial, they're doing a retrial. If they stream the retrial, I will 100% make a sequel to this video, because I think, it will raise some very interesting points worth unpacking if that, if that happens. Again, it will happen, but if it's streamed, right? Which again, we'll get to breaking down in more detail in a bit.
Go back to school. Is it Justin Ross Harris? Justin Ross Harris. You prefer just Ross? Right.
Note again the seeming incongruities with a man who's apparently spent much of the last 15 minutes wailing in anguish. Not only has Harris completely and instantly regained his physical composure, there is also no residue of grief in his voice. He speaks clearly, and his vocal intonations never fluctuate abnormally in the way you typically see from someone directly after they've been crying.
I am connected with Cobb Police Department. We're at Cobb Police headquarters. You familiar with this place? This is my apartment plan.
Now, this detective, and I think you can tell it's very obvious just from watching his interaction with Harris, but he did not believe this was an accident from second one. And none of the responding officers really did either, which is, I think, noteworthy. Again, people can be wrong about this sort of thing, but I think you don't want to put no stock in the perception of the people who were there you know. At the time, everything went down. The, Officer Piper, the woman that you heard him heard him tell to shut the fuck up earlier, the way she put it is that she said his demeanor reminded her of the scene from Anchorman where Ron Burgundy, remember when Jack Black kicks the little dog Baxter off the bridge and he starts, "Oh, Baxter!" You know, he just does that crazy over the top kind of crying. She said that Harris reminded her of Will Ferrell in that scene, which I always thought was sort of an interesting point of reference. Again, it's horrible if they're wrong, and what we are actually talking about here is a father in the grip of unimaginable grief. But again, to be redundant and repeat myself, that is just what they perceived when they arrived that day.
Left work approximately 7:15. I left the house with Cooper at about 8:30. Yeah, about 8:30. And the plan was I was going to take him to Chick-fil-A in Vinings, which I did. And
not like this would be at the forefront of Mr. Harris's mind now or at any point, but just one thing I've always thought about that would suck about being the subject of a really high-profile criminal case is everyone in the state finding out things like you eat Chick-fil-A for breakfast every fucking morning. Not to be flippant about the situation, obviously this is a horrible case. But going forward, I'm just going to assume, when I make flippant comments like that, everyone can just appreciate that I'm not making light of the situation itself. Speaking of which, some people also criticize the title of this one, think it's too hot seat, obviously a play on words. The way I always saw it was, it's supposed to be a juxtaposition of being in the hot seat of like an interrogation room, right? And yes, the crime is a hot car death, so it's a play on words, but I never saw it as, making light of Cooper's horrible death, however you feel about that. I don't know. I still don't think it's in bad taste. I guess I get where people are coming from, but I mean, fatal distraction, that's a play on words too, but I don't think anyone... Yeah, anyway, whatever. Stop being self-conscious, man.
And give him a kiss. And just today was just careless. I got in my car, and instead of going from here to here, I went straight to work, which is I turned onto Cumberland, and I drove down Cumberland Boulevard. I went to work, as if he wasn't even in the back. And I probably didn't even hear him because he falls asleep really easily when you drive a car. That's it. And I went to work. And I got there at work. I had a normal day.
Harris seems to be hesitant to itemize his day's activities.
Then I just go through my whole day of work. Okay.
R.I.P. Trevor Moore. It's a little Whitest Kid You Know sketch thrown out. If you're not into Whitest Kid You Know, I strongly recommend getting into that sketch show. It's one of my all-time favorites. And this is the hot dog sketch, which anyway, I look it up, that's all I'll say. Reason for it. Because Harris's movements during the day do not help support the notion that his leaving Cooper in the car was a genuine error he never clued onto over the entire duration of his shift. One particularly big red flag is his lunchtime activities. Harris went to a restaurant called Publix with referring to Publix grocery store as a restaurant there, a slip-up that I have been made fun of innumerable times. Is that right? Innumerable? Anyway, little story behind how I screwed that up. That is a great example of don't just assume other people are right. So we don't have a Publix here in New Zealand. I'm not familiar with the chain. at all, the grocery store chain. And there was a blog about the case that I was pulling references from when researching this, and I guess the lady who runs that blog either isn't an American or doesn't live in... Is Publix just Florida? I don't know. But wherever she lives, they don't have Publix either. She called it a restaurant because that's where he went to have lunch that day, right? So, well, you don't go to a supermarket for lunch normally. So she made that presumption. I read it on her blog, and I just assumed, oh, I guess Publix is some kind of, I don't know, fucking Tex-Mex place or something. I have no idea. But I just assumed, oh, well, she said restaurant. It must be a restaurant of some kind. Even though the picture I used even says, like, food and pharmacy or whatever. But there you go. Just don't take it for granted that other people are getting shit right. Always do your own fact-checking.
And then I finished the work day, and then we had plans to go to a movie. Me and the two guys on lunch with. We had plans to go to a movie at 5 o'clock, which is where I was going. I was going to try to get there about 4:20, 4:30, just to kind of beat if there's an after-work crowd trying to go to a movie or anything like that. I thought I'd get there a little early. And as I was driving down, whatever that road is right there by So's Kitchen, Acres Mill. As I was driving down Acres Mill, I caught a glimpse of it when I looked to my right to change lanes. I caught a glimpse of it in the back. I thought I saw it. I was seeing things.
Yeah, I probably really should have subtitled this whole thing. Again, this is just when I was earlier in the game and just didn't think it was all that important. And, thought it was more work than it really is. It's a fair amount of work, don't get me wrong, but just not as much as I thought.
Seemed like an eternity, but for just a few seconds I attempted CPR. I couldn't compose myself to do it, so there was a group there. I'm pretty sure you got all their names. And they attempted, and I saw him laying there. And he had that stare in his face. I knew he was coming.
Did you take him out in the car seat?
I did.
Okay.
I knew he was going. And
How'd you know he was going?
just because he wasn't, his eyes were open, like halfway. His eyes were open halfway. He wasn't breathing. He didn't have a pulse. And every medic training I've ever gone through, told me to check for breathing, check for a pulse. He didn't have either. I knew it. I just knew he was. I knew that I had done what every parent in their life fears they've done, and that's just leave their son in the car all that day.
I find that weird too, just this particular guy's, what's the way to put it? How much knowledge he has of the phenomenon of forgotten baby syndrome. Now, I get a lot of people have seen stories like this in the news. I have too. So you can't say that is inherently suspicious. But there's more of this later. I don't know if we'll be listening in or I'll be talking at the time he says it. But there's a point later in this interrogation, probably around right now when I'm talking actually. But, I saw this guy in the news talking about, he became an advocate for the hot car death problem after it. And the detective picked up on that too. And I'm sorry I'm blanking on the detective's name, but picked up on that too. Like, he seems to... Could you be reading too much into this? Sure. But he seems to already be mapping out the narrative in his head of, this guy, this horrible thing happened to him, and he then became an advocate for hot car. Like, almost as if, Justin is imagining himself, in some kind of 2020 special, 6 months from now, talking about how, it just... Little indicators that maybe he's planned this all out in his head, basically. Harris is a serial philanderer with a chronic 60. Here we go. Okay, here is why Mr. Harris is getting a new trial. So, the situation is that the powers that be, this went all the way to the Georgia Supreme Court. They found that the fact that this stuff was led into trial, the fact that he was screwing around in his wife with, over a half a dozen women or what have you, and also talking to them about how, he kind of felt chained down as a married man. He'd leave his wife if he could, that kind of thing. they found that was unfairly prejudicial. Basically, that by allowing that in, it was liable to make jurors think, oh, what a dirtbag, but it doesn't actually have any relevance as to whether he was more likely to have deliberately left Cooper in the car just because he's, not a faithful husband. I looked it up before going into this, so I'll even read you the quote if I can get it up on my damn screen right here. We go. Because the properly admitted evidence that Harris maliciously and intentionally left Cooper to die was far from overwhelming, we cannot say that it is highly probable that the erroneously admitted sexual evidence did not contribute to the jury's guilty verdicts, says Chief Justice David Namias in a 6-3 decision. So it wasn't exactly unanimous. The way I view it, look, I get that, but where I come from is the defendant is supposed to have the upper hand, but the prosecution still needs to be allowed to put on their case, right? Now, their theory in this case was that his motive to do what they allege he did was that he didn't want to be tied down as a married man anymore, right? Well, the only thing they have to support that, is the fact that he's constantly, chronically screwing around on his wife. The defense can still come in and say, hey, look, just because he's screwing around on his wife doesn't mean that he wants to kill his son. And they did say that, and they did make that argument. And I would think if you did a half-decent job in jury selection, you would have jurors to make a case too that would be absolutely reasonable and intelligent enough to understand that fact. But they should be able to know, right, that you've got this behavior that, depending on how you want to view it. It should be up to them to decide if it makes it more likely or not that he left his son in the car. That's where I'm coming from. But the Georgia Supreme Court decided no, and that's why he's getting a retrial. And I've got to say, although I don't think it's the most important evidence in the case, I think the most important evidence in the case is actually, funnily enough, what we just went through there. It's the position of the car seat. Because Cooper was 22 months old. He wasn't a little baby. He was a toddler. His head would have been sticking out of that car seat in the middle of the two seats. And Harris has to turn his head in that direction at least 2 times in on the way to work. I just don't get how Cooper cannot wind up in Justin's line of sight in between the Chick-fil-A and the car park. So maybe he will get reconvicted second time around, actually. Maybe I'm wrong. If the prosecution do a good enough job hammering that point home. But I think that in deliberations, it's inevitably always going to come back to, but did he have any reason to want to do this? And well, if you can't tell them about the multiple affairs and the behavior that I think clearly illustrates that married life as a kind of, middle class sort of 9-to-5 guy wasn't all that appealing to this gentleman, I don't think you're going to get a motive across the line. Though you don't need to get you don't need to demonstrate a motive. If you prove that beyond a reasonable doubt this guy did it, you don't need to prove he's the type of guy who would do it, right? That's the sort of classic rule. But still, a motive fucking helps, right? Let's not kid ourselves. And I think without that piece, my guess would be that the next jury is going to acquit him. So I just to repeat myself, I think the prosecution's hands are unreasonably tied a little bit, not being able to introduce that piece. And I think now we're talking about the point I just made, right? Let's listen back for a little bit. I've been talking for a while. Using forgetfulness as a pretext for deliberate murder. In fact, in approximately 46% of instances where a child was forgotten, the caregiver meant to drop them off at a daycare or preschool. Some of the reasons the authorities are dubious of this one have already been explained, such as Harris's physical proximity to Cooper and the 2 to 3 minute window to forget his presence. Another one that will come up as they dig deeper into Harris's communications is potential cues that one might think would prompt Harris to think of Cooper and realize something was amiss. During the day, Harris searched for child passport costs and emailed a travel agent about the cruise arrangements. He also referenced Cooper in personal text messages during the day. And in the afternoon, he sent this text message to his wife Leanna that is particularly remarkable for not having set off any alarm bells. It's not great evidence, to be honest. But, sometimes with these, it's just the little things that add up, right? Speaking of little things, one of the kind of defense talking points there about making plans for a vacation. I think if you do plan a thing like this, obviously you also try to act during the day the way you would if everything was going normally. But it's quite difficult to... It's very difficult to act completely as if things are one way when they're actually another. And I think what you could have there is, okay, he's consciously booking the travel plans to seem as if everything is normal. But then, after lunch, he just can't resist going back to the car to make sure that, because, the defense would obviously say, if he was doing it on purpose, why the fuck would he put himself back near the car, right? But my thing is, I can picture how if you're trying to pull off a thing like this, I don't even like using the word pull off, but you get what I mean. It would be, I can imagine it being impossible to resist the urge to just go back and check on the crime scene, basically, and just make sure, there's no sign that you haven't completely pulled off what you were aiming to pull off, i.e. Cooper's still alive, or no one's walked by your car and, oh my god, there's a little child in there. You just wouldn't be able to overcome the inclination to go and check to make sure that there hadn't been any disruption to your plan, right?
Hi, I'm Dr. Ernie Ward. You know how veterinarians are always telling you never...
Now this moment here, I think, is an interesting lesson in how, just from a video making perspective, the most, I wouldn't call this mundane, but the most not visually horrifying things can be absolutely just horribly disturbing. Just watching this guy talking about, and I apologize if I'm describing the obvious here, but just making observations about my videos as we watch them back. That's what creator commentary is all about, right? How the most mundane, for a want of a better word, things can be absolutely horrifying with different context, right? So he's got a vet talking about, hey, you shouldn't leave your dog in a car, and when you get to the point where he talks about, oh my god, just imagine being a dog in this kind of heat, and you as the audience member are thinking of a toddler, a 22-month-old boy. Whew.
I'll tell you, it is almost unbearable. At this point, the temperature is about 106 degrees. So, it's just getting to the point now where I can barely stand it. 25 minutes. It's now, oh gosh, what is it? 113 degrees. It's awful. The only thought that's going through my head right now is I want out of the car. It's just everything in my body is saying, get out, get out, get out. This kills, and it's a lousy way to die. Okay, made it. 30 minutes. 30 minutes in a parked car.
Not much more to say than that, right? What a lousy way to die indeed.
116. Really hot. What I really wanted to set out to do was see how it felt to be left in a parked car if I were a dog. And I know what's going on. I'm in control of the situation. What I can't imagine is how helpless and frightening it would be for a dog to be left in a car, not knowing when you're going to come, and slowly but surely having the energy and the life just burnt out of them by this heat.
When I was working for Tuscaloosa Police, we had a canine officer.
Some bad video editing there, by the way. If you go back, you see there's like a little shot where it's cut to the vet in a different sort of position or whatever, but it doesn't continue looking at the video. It just visually looks a bit crappy from an editing perspective. These days I've figured out tricks for that. If a video doesn't cut at just the right time, you can kind of detach the audio but extend the picture by just like a few frames, so no one thinks it looks clunky and weird. You can't notice the sound isn't completely in sync because it's just a few frames, but it makes it look just that little bit neater. So there's some craft stuff for you guys. Amazing insights we get with these commentaries. I think this is a raging success so far, don't you? I don't know. Oh, I forgot about reaching for his bag. I mean, again, think it. So you're in the driver's seat. The seat's placed there. Your 22-month-old boy, again, is not a little baby. And you reach over for your bag to the passenger side, and you don't see the toddler? I don't know. I just don't know if I can buy it. You'd need to get a neurologist to, and I guess, they did get a neurologist actually during the trial, a memory guy. But if my memory serves correctly, he kind of faltered a bit on cross when the prosecutor was asking him about cues, right? Things you get as reminders and things going in your line of sight, for instance. Does that have an effect on memory? And again, if memory serves, the doctor did not have many good answers for that. But anyway, you'd need to get a neurologist or whatever for me to be totally, confident in what I'm saying right now. But my intuition would be that your mind playing tricks on you wouldn't really extend to something being right in front of you, but maybe there are phenomenons where, no, if you are set up in a certain way, where you fully anticipate your son to not be in front of you, and then you turn and reach for your bag, and he is at least in your peripheral vision, you just kind of cancel it out or whatever, like your brain doesn't register it because it's not expecting it. I'm making that up right now, just to be perfectly clear. I'm spitballing the kind of thing that might be the case. I have no idea. My intuition just says that doesn't seem right. I don't think things quite work like that. I think if something's in front of you, generally speaking, you notice it, I would have thought. Especially if it's your son.
That there's an incident that happens, right? You're going to ask me questions on which I have invoked my right to answer. There are certain criminal statutes that you have to look at, and if you think that one of them meets the qualifications, that's your decision. I'd like to say I highly disagree. It's absolute accident. There's accidental. And,
Now, this is another thing, interpreting subjective behavior and passing judgments on stuff that, we can't know everything about. Sort of part of my job description, really. But, again, to repeat myself, okay, it might not be scientific, but are we going to pretend it's nothing? This whole kind of high school debate club shit that's going on right now. In fact, I'm stealing that description. There was a neighbor of Harris's that was initially very defensive of him when this story broke. He was one of the people going on the news saying, no, Justin would never. I think it was a she, actually, who said this. She was going on the news and stuff and saying, no, Justin would never. And when this interrogation footage came out, she completely flipped and said, I don't, fuck him. And she said it was that. It was the whole, well, yeah, but no, it wasn't intentional. Intentional is when what I did, you see, was actually and she described it as when I saw him acting like he was in a high school debate club over this, I completely changed my mind. And I can relate to that. Again, it's just one of those things that, gotta bear in mind, I mean, this is hours after you turned around and saw that you killed your son. Hours later, you go, well, the thing about intention is sometimes it doesn't wash for me.
It is 7:30 now, and we're in our heavy. Cool. So I'm going to talk to my wife. Talk to me in a little bit. Maybe I don't know yet. I need to talk to her first.
Harris will be allowed to talk to his wife, and that conversation will also be filmed in the interrogation room. The audio balancing is also crappy in this video. This is going back to a time where I hadn't really figured out how to use audio limiters or anything like that, so there will be various moments where the interrogation's kind of going, oh, okay, we're interrogating you, and blah, 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 and then, there'll be a commentary piece. Hello, guys, okay, and, I'll come in really fucking loud. So, sorry for that. Don't do that as much these days. I'm very conscious about audio levels. Hopefully it shows. And yeah, this is another thing just to repeat kind of essentially what I'm saying in the video, but I still see comments every now and again going, I think Leanna had something to do with it. I find it hard to wrap my head around where people are coming from on that. Here's my thing with that, okay? Let's put it this way. How the fuck does that conversation come about? I think about it. Leanna comes home after a hard day's work or whatever, and Cooper's throwing a tantrum or something. She goes, oh, sometimes I just, get so stressed out being a mother. And Justin Ross Harris goes, well, you know what, honey? I had an idea. I mean, I don't mean to be flippant again, but how does the plan come about? How do they start talking about such a thing? It's just not. It's already insanely rare enough for one parent to get such an idea. I mean, it's probably one of the key defense points, really, for Justin Ross Harris is why would someone without a real background ever do something so horrible? How could that happen? Well, how could two people with no backgrounds both come together and both, I mean, again, just number one, how can one even feel comfortable raising the idea to the other? But let alone that, actually end up coming to agree with each other and going, okay, great, honey, today's the day. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Bizarre theory, in my opinion, that she could possibly be a co-conspirator in all of this. But anyway, let's listen in, because it is some pretty weird shit they both say. Leanna Harris would later clarify her meaning. Ross Harris was known to habitually embellish and overtalk, and Leanna Harris was so disbelieving of the idea that someone could see her husband as having deliberately murdered Cooper, that she wondered if he might have made certain exaggerations that had got him in trouble. Given responding officers perceived his wailing as putting on a show, her theory actually has some merit to it. There's me pointing out the obvious a little bit. Again, I think I've got a better eye these days for what you need to really explicitly make note of. It's not a big deal, though. Don't beat yourself up, mate. It's a decent episode, I think, on balance. This is why we're doing this one first, by the way. I didn't want to do Dennis Leary first because it's so short. I think we'll probably do Anthony Palmer and Dennis Leary the same month, assuming we do this again. Looks a bit like a Dave's Lemonade thumbnail, that moment, if you go back and watch. Anyway, what was I saying? I can't even remember. Oh yeah, why are we doing this one? And and not starting in order. I figured Dennis Leary is just, too short for a first one. Wanted to have one that there's actually something to say, something about with this. And Anthony Palmer, I just fucking hate that episode. And Holt's Claw is just way too long. I didn't want to do a 2 hour, 17-minute one, and it's my first attempt to do this. So it's kind of a middle ground, this one. It's kind of a bit of a longer one. It's over an hour. There's quite a lot to talk about, but it's not too long. So I just figured it was, a good video to start this experiment with. For acting as if their previous companion was as easily replaceable as a broken accessory. On the same day as they've lost their first and only child, the Harrises are already discussing making another one. Given there truly is no reason to believe Leanna Harris is culpable, it would be cruel to push that point too hard. You really are witnessing a mother in a severe state of shock, but it's easy to see why detectives didn't immediately move past her. And what of Justin Ross Harris? It certainly doesn't look good, and all of the unfavourable... Alright, defence talking points now, let's have a look. Against him, after an initial burst of sympathy when only the nature of Cooper's death was known. In light of all you've seen so far, you may be thinking there were absolutely no indicators to support his innocence. But as it happens, there were plenty. Here are just a few. Although he certainly expressed resentment of his marriage, all the more loathsome given his turning to his constantly scorned wife for solace, he never conveyed anything but deep affection for his son, in his real or online life. Attempts were made to portray otherwise, but they were all weak in context. He visited the subreddit Child Free, for instance, but this was after being sent a link by a friend, and he expressed disapproval. By all accounts, he hated being married, but loved being a dad. That will be illustrated all the more dramatically by his soon-to-be ex-wife's testimony. The consoling attitude of Leanna Harris that you saw in the interrogation room was not long for this world once the extent of her husband's sex addiction came to light. She divorced Harris while he sat in jail awaiting trial, and reverted to her maiden name. But all the same, Leanna Taylor took the stand as the defence's star witness. Her position was clear. Harris had ruined her life, she never wanted anything to do with him again, and she could absolutely not believe he would ever purposefully do anything to harm Cooper. Given his web and sexting history looked so damning, you would expect him to have made some attempt at clearing all of that data. I am going to say stuff, guys, I'm just watching this back. He would have been more capable of it than most. As much as his activities during the day might seem like cues that should have set off alarm bells in Harris's mind, they also present problems for the prosecution. Why would Harris search for child passport costs if he had no intention of paying for one? It could be that he was deliberately conducting himself as if all was normal, so he could make that exact argument if he was investigated. But that raises the issue of his phone and web history again. Either he was anticipating scrutiny, or he wasn't. There was absolutely... That's true. I'm agreeing with myself. Good point, Matt. So I've forgotten some of this. It's been a while. To simply take the light bulbs back to his desk, and then take them to the car at the end of his shift when he was gearing up for the big reveal. In a similar vein, why leave the treehouse parking lot at all? Every extra second Harris is in the car with Cooper takes away from the believability that he could have been totally unaware of his son's presence. The prosecution argued he drove to the Acres Mill parking lot to make more of a scene. That doesn't make any sense. There was plenty of foot traffic coming and going from the treehouse office. Putting on a frantic performance right there and then would have been of no disadvantage to selling his story. Harris's attorney, Maddox Kilgore, pushed on all of this and much more at trial, which is available in its entirety online. It's a great example of... Okay, so by and large, I don't really find much of what I just said there very convincing. The web history, as I noted, and his lack of trying to cover his tracks in advance of the big day, as it were, I think that's a decent point. By the way, this is something you'll kind of often hear people saying kind of crime comments when this kind of subject comes up. You can't delete your web history. You can't hide the contents of your hard drive. You can't get rid of that shit. You can. It's an exaggeration. And of course you can, right? I mean, at least with the hard drive example, of course you can. If there was no way to ever get rid of the data on your hard drive, then you wouldn't be able to free up space on the fucking things, right? The record has to get wiped. Otherwise, the data wouldn't be, you couldn't free up the data, if that makes sense. But in terms of like metadata, like any indication that this sort of thing was on your computer at one point, in terms of deleting it, so thoroughly that forensic digital software or whatever can't turn it up. It's not impossible. It is very, very difficult, though. If you try to do it as average Joe citizen, odds are you're gonna fuck up somewhere and some kind of trace of something is gonna be left behind. If you've seen enough crime stories concerning the subject, then you know that, right? But you can, and he is an IT guy, so he would be a good candidate for, definitely giving it the good old college try and maybe pulling it off. But he didn't seem to even make an attempt. I don't know about the web dating stuff, the sexting stuff. If it's someone else's server, I've got to believe probably by law, pretty much all the dating apps and stuff are required to keep certain records of what's gone on in any corner of their platform. So I'm not sure if he ever would have had a good shot at completely erasing any history of the existence of that kind of stuff. But now that I'm thinking, isn't that pretty much all of it? It's not really hard drive content, is it? But his web history, like looking at the vet video and stuff like that, no attempts to try and get rid of that. So that's kind of worth something. I don't find it extremely compelling, to be honest. I think probably what you can just take away from it is that, again, he'd seen all these news stories and stuff, so he just thought that what would happen is people would go, oh my god, poor guy, as opposed to, oh my god, this situation looks fishy as all hell. Pretty reasonable explanation. And everything else, I've already been over the booking, vacation plans and all that stuff, and why would you act like you were not anticipating suspicion in some ways, but act like you are anticipating suspicion in other ways? Because you're human, I guess, and very few people are 100% consistent in their behavior with whatever objective they might have, where, we make mistakes, But anyway, let's listen in for a bit.
Meditation at all. We don't have to prove that he woke up that morning and at 7:55 decided, you know what, I'm going to murder my child. Unfortunately, most cases like this are a crime of opportunity. When it presents itself, and when your mind gets in that point, you do it. A lot of people give examples of how quick malice can be formed. And they snap, because it's that quick. Malice can be formed.
Some people say that the prosecutor kind of looks like Justin Ross Harris's thinner twin. I don't really see it, to be honest. Some people go, they're doppelgangers. I think they barely look really that alike. I can see what people are getting at. So it's I can see it, but I can't see it, I guess is what I'm saying. I would never independently think such a thing. Put it that way. But some of you are probably looking at the screen right now going, Matt, how can you not see what they're talking about? Because as I say, a lot of people go, they're ridiculous doppelgangers, but must just be another neurological thing, I guess.
To that parking lot. Is that the car seat? And how it looked when he passed the parking spot on the right? Is this the same parking seat, the same car seat, as when he backed up? Backed up like this and pulled straight. Is that the same car seat that was in there? And how it looked when he was in there for 30 seconds on June 18, 2014? Is that how the car seat looked when that child left Chick-fil-A wide awake, being excited for school? Is that the same car seat that the defendant had to reach by to pick up his work bag to go into work that morning, that we saw him walk in, that he admitted he got from his passenger seat? Is that the same car seat that he got back into that afternoon and within 3 seconds sped off and drove for some time with that child there, having been baking all day in that car, making those turns all the way there on a route that he shouldn't have taken?
Is it route or route? That's a thing that I often wonder, have never really looked up, because I got corrected on it once in broadcasting school when I said, let's go a different route. And my teacher, I think correctly, because his logic checks out, he was going, no, it's always route, never route. Let's go the scenic route. It's always the word that means that thing whenever you're talking about that. So you should always say route. It's Route 99. No one ever says Route 99, but people often go, let's go that route. I think it's always supposed to be route, but you can leave your opinions on that, or maybe just a factual answer in the comments. Anyway, let's see what the defense has to say. Good job addressing the substance of what the prosecutor just said there, Matt.
To understand is this: they're all the same. They are all the same. We don't have gradations of murder in Georgia. It's not first degree or second degree.
One thing I will say, without even going into specifics about Maddox Kilgore's closing argument, see, I can remember his name perfectly. I think not just his closing argument, but the entire case he put on. I think both the prosecutor, whose name I'm blanking on, and defense attorney Maddox Kilgore, whose name I completely remember for whatever reason, I think they both did a really good job with the cases they put on. I just think the prosecution had the evidence in this one, but I don't think the defense dropped the ball. I think Kilgore really did pretty much as good as he could with the facts of the case. And look, I'll give you this: it's a borderline case, in my opinion. And some people might say, well, if it's borderline, that means there's reasonable doubt. No, I'm saying I think it's borderline on reasonable doubt. I do go back and forth on it. I don't envy anyone on the jury for this one, because it's one of those ones where I would sit with it and kind of go, oh, I really think he did it. But can I say there's enough doubt's been taken off that there's not reasonable doubt? Could a reasonable person come to I think a reasonable person probably could, to be honest. That's probably actually my take. That's probably my take, is that I think he's guilty, but I might, by an inch, I could change my opinion on this in the next 5 minutes and go back again. But I would probably say I do have to hand it to you by an inch, there is reasonable doubt, just. But how much would that suck as a juror? I mean, could you do it? If you really, genuinely, you believe this guy intentionally burned his son to death, basically. I'm going to let him walk, because I think there's only like an 89% chance he did that. Be tough. I don't know if I could go through with casting that vote, even though, I would have taken a pledge to do so. Ugh. Yeah, this is a horrible case. Horrible case. What was I just about to say? Shit. Reasonable doubt. Oh yeah, I think Maddox Kilgore and the defense team did a really good job with this, and that's the funny thing about the appeals process, is one of the first things everyone has to go directly to and claim is ineffective counsel, ineffective assistance of counsel, or whatever. Basically, your lawyer did a shitty enough job that you didn't get a fair trial, is what it comes down to. And if, your lawyer wants to do right by you, what they have to basically do is back you up on that. So in the appeals process, Justin Ross Harris has his new lawyers, and you got Maddox Kilgore has to come in and go, yeah, I'm just kind of a fucking idiot, basically. I don't know what I'm doing. Even though I'm sure he doesn't actually believe that. But it's kind of what every lawyer who's got a client who's got to go through an appeals process basically has to do. Is, stand up in open court and say publicly, I'm just bad at my job, everyone. I'm sorry. If only my client didn't have such a moron. Maybe he'd be free today. But he didn't, so he's not. But please give him another shot with someone who actually knows how to do their job. Not the most, not the most dignified duty, but I guess, hey, you gotta do it. You gotta do it if you want to do right by your former client.
These were accurate. Confirmed by Greg Sanders at Home Depot. Confirmed by R.B. Smith with Cobb County Police, checking the times of the phones, checking the times of the receipts, checking the times of the videos at Chick-fil-A, and accounting for any difference in time. He continues the conversation. Agreed hug, we both need that, at 9:24:28 while still in the car with Cooper. 9:24:42 a.m., he first appears on one of the treehouse parking lot camera videos coming in the side area. 9:25:38, car comes to a stop, and at 9:26:15, the defendant shuts the door on Cooper. And you saw all that time in there he was sitting, over 30 seconds in the car with that child. And you remember the defense showed you that one video where he parked kind of up close and he's in the car for a while? Y'all remember seeing how he was in there moving around, going to get this, going to get that? There ain't no way he missed that child. We've heard a lot about excuses for this defendant, which have been turned away at every stop. But who's going to speak for Cooper?
I forgot about that. So he was sitting in the car for 30 seconds. I mean, with him right next to his face, pretty much. I mean, more or less, that is literally, yeah. Like I say, I mean, I know I'm being a bit redundant saying the same things over and over again at this point. But sometimes some cases are like that, where it really does, it's tricky. See, I think I am going back. No reasonable doubt. Maybe there's a 2% chance, but I don't know about an 11% chance. It just doesn't seem right. It just doesn't seem to pass the smell test. I get why his ex-wife still thinks he's innocent. It would be very difficult to, have a child with someone and, unless someone could show you them doing it on film or something, it would be hard to bring yourself to the place of believing that they would really purposefully kill your baby like that. So it doesn't seem too strange to me that Leanna didn't stay with him, divorced him, but stuck with him to that extent, if you get what I'm saying. I don't find that too compelling, because I completely understand how not everyone, but just a lot of people, it wouldn't be rare to find someone who would just have a need to lie to themselves in those kind of circumstances, I would think. Just totally speculating.
Ask the clerk to publish the Thank you, Mr. Phillips.
In the Superior Court, County, State of Georgia versus Justin Ross Harris, defendant, case number 14-9-3124, verdict on. We, the jury, find as follows: count one, malice murder.
I don't like how in the States, and I don't think this happens really outside of the States, I'm pretty damn certain it doesn't happen in New Zealand. I don't like how the prosecution gets a rebuttal. They say that the reason they get that is that it's to be fair because the state has the burden of proof, right? So it's kind of more in the defense's favor. But I would have thought if it's in the defense's favor, then the defense should get the last word. Having the last word is one of the biggest advantages one could have in a trial. So I don't see why the prosecution, who have the burden of proof, should get that. As we've said, just what a horrible case. Not a fun one, this one. For sure. Not a fun one at all. And this last line here, if we just listen in. Specific detail. They may have come back with not guilty. Well, last line, soon. They started to drift in that direction. That one specific detail was just something they could never get past. And that is some projection on my part. I've got no idea what the jury were going back and forth on, but that would be the thing that I would just keep coming back to, is the positioning of that car seat. But anyway, that is it, guys. That is the first creative commentary for Metal Crime in Society. I don't know how successful it was. It didn't feel that great, if I'm being honest, but it's one of those things where, if you're self-conscious about talking over yourself talking in a room alone, sometimes people observing it can actually find a lot more fun than you do. So we'll just have to see. If you didn't like it, then I'm sorry. As I say, it's an experiment. We'll just see how it goes, but I hope you found that somewhat informative. Maybe some new information you didn't know before, or just interested to hear the perspective of the creator on the video, whatever, either way. Thanks for checking it out. And if you do have any questions about the case or whatever that you would now want to bring up after watching this, just drop them in the old page comment section on this release, and I'll get back to you and chat to you about the case. Sounds fun to me, right? It doesn't? I don't know. Whatever, guys. Thanks again.